So I think dieting is probably one of the worst things people with diabetes can do, yet it's one of the only things we're told to do.
Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. I'm Jonathan, and I'm here to help you end 24/7 food thoughts, binge eating, and actually enjoy life with food. This episode is for educational and informational purposes only, not to be substituted for medical or personalized advice. Check the link in the description for my recovery resources, and let's get straight to the episode. Hey guys, welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast, and I'd like to introduce a special guest, Danielle Bubliz, a specialist on improving your relationship with food and improving your diabetes and your blood sugars. But how about you tell me a bit more about yourself, Danielle?
All right, thanks for having me. So I'm Danielle, a registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor. I primarily work with people with all forms of diabetes, and I mainly emphasize trying to help people heal their relationship with food while managing blood sugars, which sometimes people think is not possible. So definitely what I like to hit on.
Yeah. And how long have you been supporting people with diabetes, or at least in a private practice kind of area?
So I have been with my business, Food Freedom Diabetes, for over a year, almost 2 years, I think, if I can count right. I think it's a year, almost a year and a half at this point.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And I just want to ask, so where did this all come from? Like, what made you want to support people struggling with the relationship with food and diabetes?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I hadn't had a diagnosis at this point, but I had been struggling with binge eating, dieting. It's like from a very young age. I remember my pediatrician telling my mom she needs to lose weight. And so by the time I was 11, I was working with personal trainers. I was going to weight loss boot camps. So my relationship with food was pretty fractured. I just felt like I always needed to be dieting. So getting a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes when I was 16, I remember really not knowing anything about diabetes except for some of these misconceptions, oh, well, if you get diabetes, it's because you had too much sugar or you needed to lose weight. I had all those very kind of fat phobic thoughts, but was all I heard about. So I felt a lot of shame when I was diagnosed, and nobody else in my family had it. So it was hard to understand where did this come from? And to give you just a little background too, about a month prior to getting diagnosed, I had a really severe flu. I was sick for an entire month. It was probably the most sick I've been in my life with a flu. And my endocrinologist was talking to me about that. And he was saying, I really think that this triggered an autoimmune response for you because, I don't see a genetic component, the family history side of it was not there. So, I appreciated that and that was helpful, but I still felt a lot of shame for that diagnosis. Flash forward to college, I became very interested in nutrition. Retrospect, I probably was a little obsessed with it. As maybe you understand, I want to look at all the labels and I want to look at numbers and I want to understand everything. When I started my undergrad, I had a professor that assigned intuitive eating, which was really cool. It's not very common.
Yeah.
And I remember reading it and I really resonated with a lot of what they were talking about with rejecting the diet mentality, this just kind of desire for weight loss and, all these things that the dieter struggles with. And that binge pattern is a huge struggle. So I remember she assigned us, she said, I want to do a practice with you guys called food habituation. So I want you to choose a food that you feel like is off limits. And I want you to give yourself a few days to have as much of that food as you want. And I thought she was crazy for saying that. I was like, does she even know what she's doing right now? Like, I'm going to go crazy off the walls. Um, so my food of choice was peanut butter. I loved peanut butter, but I felt out of control around it. So I would get the powdered peanut butters. I would get, I would tell my roommates, just don't, you can't have peanut butter in the house, which terrible roommate. Can't have peanut butter because of me. But I bought myself some peanut butter. The first day I had some, I remember feeling really guilty and just like all these thoughts came up. I'm like, what am I doing? The next day I was like, okay, I'm doing this again. Okay, it feels a little easier, but it's still hard. And then by the third day, I remember while the guilt was still there, something that was different was like, I actually don't want this right now. I'm feeling kind of like I've had enough. And that was a huge light bulb moment for me where I started to connect what it was talking about with that repeated exposure and giving yourself permission with food. And so from that point on, I really just started diving deeper into like intuitive eating. I definitely struggled with rejecting the diet mentality for a while, but for the past like 5 years, I've been practicing intuitive eating and I started integrating it into my work. And I knew I always wanted to work with others with diabetes, but I think it started hitting me more within the past 2 years where, I'd spent some time working with people with eating disorders and intuitive eating. And I was getting people coming through with diabetes. And I think I was like kind of shocked, like, wow, I didn't realize so many people like me with diabetes are having a hard time with their relationship with food. I thought this was a me thing. And so I started helping people with diabetes. I started my business and it's been such an amazing experience, like to be able to help others, like release that guilt and that shame and help them learn that all the foods that they want to eat can exist in their lives. And it doesn't have to be those very black and white rules that we get at diagnosis. So that's kind of how I came to be.
That's amazing. We need more professors like that guy.
Oh my gosh. I got really lucky because my school, so I went to Cal State Chico, which is in Northern California. And the professor's name was Don Clifford. And then I had a couple other professors that were health at every size aligned and teaching a lot of weight neutral. I mean, it wasn't everything, but there was a lot of that exposure. So I feel lucky that I learned about that in undergrad.
Yeah, I mean, when I studied here in Plymouth University, here in the UK, we didn't have any lectures that touched greatly on intuitive eating or health at every size. I actually came across intuitive eating and health at every size or food freedom mostly through social media, really. And so, I keep forgetting the names. Evelyn Rish. I think.
Evelyn Tribole and Elise
Evelyn-
Resch. Oh, you merged their names.
Mixing it up. Like one person anyway.
Okay. Yeah, they're amazing. Definitely. Yeah. So you're so right. I feel like in our like dietetics profession and in school, it's just not very common. But I do think that intuitive eating has picked up so much in like the social media realm. TikTok, Instagram, all that. So yeah, that's so cool that you found it.
Yeah. And going back to your little experiment of food habituation, was that experiment your professor told you to do? Was it an assignment or something? Or was it just like, how would you try this?
It was an assignment because we were going through intuitive eating and she wanted us to try it out. Because I think we had also I'm trying to remember, because it was a counseling course and it was trying to show some different like stages of change, things like that. But yeah, it was an assignment she had for us. And I remember having a spark of excitement where I'm like, it's going to be peanut butter. And then I got home and was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be peanut butter.
Oh, because actually I was going to ask about that, like the cycle of change, because I'm only assuming, but let's say there were like hypothetically like 50 people in that room, and then I don't think if I struggled really, really badly with my relationship with food, I'm just gonna ignore that assignment. Like, oh, I'm gonna pretend. Yes, I already know what the outcome's gonna be. I'm just gonna just do
Yeah,
it. What was your motivation?
totally.
Yeah, what was your motivation to continue? Having peanut butter, not be concerned about your weight if you weren't concerned.
Yeah, such a good question. I wish I could put myself back at that point to remember why I followed through with it. Cause you're right. It's like people could have just done the assignment, turned it in, not really have the experience. I think there's just this part of me deep down that wanted to experience not feeling obsessed with food, because that's all I knew. It's literally all I knew from the time I was young. So it's like reading about food habituation, going through some of intuitive eating. It's like, I want to experience that. And I know it's really hard. So why not give it a go?
Yeah. And so you mentioned very briefly that intuitive eating was that path to helping you reach food freedom and improving your blood sugars. Was it an easy
Mhm.
change or was it like grueling to jump into intuitive?
Okay. So I always talk to people about this, like my friends, other people that, focus on like food freedom, intuitive eating content. And maybe you can relate to this, but I just feel like there's so many layers.
Mm.
There's so many things to unlearn. And it's not exactly like the post you see online where it's like, just eat the cookie. It's like, yeah, I understand. Cool idea. But it's like there's more underneath that you really have to work through to get to a point where you're not thinking about those foods all the time or thinking about the weight gain or weight loss, whatever it might be. So, yeah, I think it took some time for me. Like I think even within the past 4 to 5 years, I've noticed random food rules come up that I haven't even noticed, where it's like I was only buying whole wheat bread for a period of time. My husband's like, can we get a different type of bread? No offense, double fiber, nut seed bread. I just would like to have some sourdough bread, things like that I just didn't really recognize. So yeah, it's been a learning process and it took some time. But I think as I started unlearning a lot of like my fat phobic beliefs and I was letting go of this idea that I needed to be a certain weight to one, have a good A1C, like within range A1C, and two, to be healthy in general. Like I held onto those two beliefs so strongly
Mm.
that I just felt like I was in this never ending loop of not being able to attain it.
Yeah. And when you were in this cycle of like binge eating, what did it look, how did it affect your blood sugars? What did it look like?
Oh, yeah. So it would be, where I was being super quote unquote good and eating all the right things. I was doing a lot of like low carb and, low carb pizza. It's like everything I really wanted to eat was turned into a low carb version. But when I would go spend time with people, we'd go out to eat, I would feel stressed. And it's like that stress would like ramp me up. And I would remember coming home and I would have some things in the house that were like for my cheat days and I would just binge on them. And it's like watching my blood sugars go up. I felt like such a failure. I was like, I did it again. Like I could have prevented this. I shouldn't have done that. I had dinner when I was with my friends. Why did this happen? Like I didn't realize that I had unmet needs that, were just lingering there. So yeah, it would definitely impact my blood sugars and it wouldn't feel good.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious because like having episodes of binging and restricting, that would acutely make your blood sugars go up and down. But what did your HbA1c look like? Like
Not good.
really?
Yeah, it was very chaotic. And I'm trying not to say good and bad. I'm trying not to like make it a black and white thing. But what I noticed was I was having a really hard time finding a stable range for myself.
Mm.
It was very much like roller coaster. Um, and it was interesting because recently, being pregnant this past year, we have to have pretty tight control. And I knew I wanted to approach it in a way where I'm still giving myself permission. But I looked back at my different A1Cs, and it's like the times that I was dieting, my A1C was like all over the map. Like there was no rhyme or reason. Even if I was eating mostly low carb, the binges and, the having my ups and downs, it just wasn't helping me.
Yeah. And so I assume you're on insulin, Danielle?
I am. Yeah. I have my insulin pump. I don't know why I feel like I need to show you, but here it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I want to ask, because commonly, I'm just thinking like in a hospital setting or a clinical setting, when dietitians come across people who are struggling with diabetes, and then their blood sugars or A1C is like all over the place. Oftentimes, you could often like point to like, you got the wrong dose of insulin, or you're not taking your insulin well. But
yeah.
after hearing from you, we need to also take into account the relationship with food and if they're having binges or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about like the burnout that you experience, taking care of diabetes is a full-time job. It's really exhausting. Again, going back to like those unmet needs or, feeling restricted around things that you want to have. I think there gets to a point where every person with diabetes feels so burnt out. It goes into that like what the hell effect that people have with binging. So it's like, whatever, I need a day off. I need a vacation from managing this because it's so tiring.
Yeah. So when you do get diabetes burnout, what do you feel like would be helpful, or what do you clinically find helpful for people who are struggling with diabetes burnouts?
Oh yeah. I love talking about this too, like with my groups and stuff, because it's just, we all go through it. So my recommendations are to kind of assess like some of the things that are causing you stress. So being able to maybe journal it out or just have some time to think about it. So for example, let's say you're feeling burnt out, and I can give you an example. I was feeling a few months ago burnt out with all the things. And I decided for myself, you know what? I'm going to focus on making sure I'm eating and doing finger pricks instead of having my continuous glucose monitor. I'm going to check my blood sugar, do the things I normally do, but rather than having something that's telling me all day long, I'm just going to check. And that's what I needed. That's not what everyone else needs, but I just kind of took all the different tasks and I made it simpler for myself. I took 1 to 2 things that are crucial, making sure you're eating. Absolutely. That's always going to be on the table. And making sure I'm still just checking in with my blood sugars because I need to make sure I'm feeling okay. Because when your blood sugars are high or low, it just doesn't feel good. So I chose those 2 things. And that's what I always say to people is if feeling overwhelmed, you have tons of tasks that are weighing you down and making you exhausted, choose a few things that are really important, like eating and maybe just checking in with your blood sugars if you're able to.
By the way, just a quick break from the podcast to let you know of my free hunger regulation webinar series, which is in the link in the description of this podcast. There's also an ebook version if you're more of a reader than a watcher. This is the perfect resource I wish I had when I struggled with binge eating years ago, which is used to guide you from everything you need to know, from why we binge, what are the binge triggers, and the eating pattern to stop binge eating. Because when we've been struggling with binge eating for so long, you and your body lose touch of what normal hunger and normal fullness is. You're constantly on feast or famine mode. So head to the link in the description of this podcast for the free hunger regulation resources to have a clear game plan to tackle binge eating for good. Anyway, let's get straight back to the episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just keeping it like a very minimalist, but not completely going on a full vacation. That's so good.
Yeah. And there's definitely been times where I've had clients where I'm like, looking at the numbers is not helping you. I think you even just need a day to take a step back. And I know that sounds really like terrifying as like a clinician talking to a patient, but sometimes even the numbers are triggering. And I think that's also why, like with people with diabetes, if you've struggled with an eating disorder or you get an eating disorder after diagnosis, it feels really hard to heal your relationship with food because you're thinking about blood sugar numbers all the time, and that can be so triggering. So I always give people the permission, if checking your blood sugars is stressing you out, going to take a little break from that. And I know that's scary,
That's really
but
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
important though, because that cycle can continue, and it's just tough.
Yeah. And on the topic of diabetes burnout, because I feel like this is really, really important to go through.
Yeah.
So for people who maybe haven't gone through diabetes burnout, or maybe they're feeling burnt out, but they don't really know why, what do you find are the common triggers of people, so they can prepare, like, and like prevention is better than a quote unquote cure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, well, I feel like it's very much like a thought process. Like they're still going through the motions, but maybe it feels like you're dragging your feet. It's getting harder to think about what you want to eat. It's getting harder to kind of like get the rest that you need. Basically, it just feels like you're moving in slow motion. I don't know if that's a great way of describing it, but it's kind of how people have described it to me, and I've experienced it. So if you're feeling a lot of that fatigue, mental fatigue, and maybe even physical fatigue, yeah, like even coming down to like, what are you going to eat? You know what? You do not need to be meal prepping right now. Go to the store, get some takeout, whatever it's going to be. Make it simpler for yourself. It's okay. And I think as like dietitians too, it's really fun to talk about like frozen foods are great. Getting in those frozen veggies and fruits, awesome. Go pick up some rotisserie chicken, make a sandwich. It's like just simplify. So does that answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Just give yourself permission to have those, well, I like to say comfort foods. But
Yeah.
there's a little disclaimer that like if you're using food only to cope with stressful moments, it's your only coping mechanism, then that's
Yeah.
a problem. But it's all right to like give yourself permission to have these
Yeah.
recharge foods every now
I
and then.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And exactly. It is comfort food, because food can be emotional, and absolutely, like there's times when that is great. And also if it's your only tool in the toolbox, it becomes challenging.
Yeah. And what does your HbA1c look like at the moment now that you're following intuitive eating?
Yeah. So I'm not going to give an exact number just in case there's anyone that feels triggered by numbers. I don't know. Maybe they don't, but it's been under a 7 for a while.
Okay.
And I think that was also like a huge moment for me, because I think I only had one time. I've had diabetes for like 16 years. And I only had one time where it was under a 7, and that was the first few months after diagnosis, because I was put on insulin and I was not eating enough because I was so scared of what I was eating. So lots of low carb, not enough. But I was getting praise for that. Like, great job, you did it. And I couldn't maintain it. So I always held on to that. Like, I haven't been under a 7 in over like 10, 12 years. And as I started working through intuitive eating, I started realizing, we have tools for coping with things. It's like I started realizing and building tools for blood sugar management that were health promoting for me. Learning and figuring out what kind of movement I like, making sure I am focusing on adequate sleep, stress management, understanding how to pair certain foods together, which not only is satisfying, but is helpful for a slower blood sugar spike. So as that was happening, I started seeing the numbers go down, down, down. And my life wasn't really changing. That's the thing. It's like I wasn't feeling deprived. I wasn't feeling like, how am I going to keep this up? It's like I was just adding things in versus taking things away. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, really interesting. And then, so I guess my point of view at the moment right now is, if I'm imagining myself that I have diabetes and I'm struggling with binge eating and restricting every now and then, I think the next thing I'd like to ask you, Danielle, is, okay, maybe I might feel like I want to start reintroducing food, but I'm really worried that my blood sugars are going to skyrocket if I give myself
Mhm.
permission to eat regular meals,
Mhm.
including the foods I crave every now and then. So what do you
Mhm.
say to people who are in that transition period?
Yeah. So I definitely try to talk with people about bringing in curiosity with blood sugars. So if somebody says something like that to me, I always respond with, your blood sugar could spike. It may not, though. And if we don't give this an opportunity just to be curious about what's going to happen, you won't know. And usually I try to like be very gentle in this because I understand it's hard. And like for some people, we'll come up with different ideas. I talk with them like, let's make sure that you're eating consistently throughout the day, because even that is going to help with that stability. Do you want to try to add in like a protein or fat source with this, fibers, just see how it goes. Basically, just let yourself experiment and be okay with what that blood sugar response might be, because it could be different the next time. There could be something you could add to it. So, almost in a way, like its own exposure, you're just giving little exposures until the person feels comfortable and feels safe to have those foods around.
Yeah, okay. And the thing I'd like to ask also is because you mentioned very briefly on food pairing, for those who are not familiar
Mhm.
with it, what is food pairing and how can it help your blood sugars? Adding more food? How is that going to help my blood sugar?
Yeah.
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
That seems interesting. So when we are creating a meal, typically if someone's thinking like, okay, I'm gonna have like, for example, some oatmeal. That can be big scary feelings for people with diabetes. But what happens is when you throw in maybe like a protein and fat source, let's say you're throwing in some peanut butter, it's got some protein, has some fat, maybe throw in some fiber, some berries. So the protein and fat slows down the breakdown of the carbohydrate, which would be the oats. So as the carbs are breaking down, which again, that's what they're meant to do. They are meant to give us that energy. They're our brain's primary fuel source. You throw in the protein and fat, it's going to slow it down. So now when your blood sugar is increasing, it's going to have a slower curve up, and it's going to help you have more stable energy. So I talk about this all the time with people. How can you balance your plate, and what are the benefits of that? So pasta, have your bowl of pasta. Do you want to throw chicken in? Do you want to throw in some broccoli? Do you want to have some cheese? Like, I feel like these are ways of making the food, one, more enjoyable, but two, definitely a good source of that like slower breakdown for the carbs. So yeah, that's what food pairing is. And you can do it with snacks and meals. And I think it's just a really great tool for people, especially when you're trying to work on healing your relationship with food.
It's actually like hitting, well, I don't like to say this term, like hitting two birds with one stone. Like you're introducing possibly your fear foods, and then you're also like improving your blood sugars. So it's a really good
Yeah.
motivator, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely helpful to know, because I think again, thinking about food pairing and then thinking about, the previous question you had asked, if someone's scared to see how a food's going to impact them, it's like again, this is a really great tool. It's not the only way, but it's a tool that can be helpful.
Yeah. And I also like to like pick your brains also on this, Danielle. What have you
Mm.
heard of like for diabetes? Sometimes doctors would recommend very low calorie diets, like roughly 800, maybe 1,000 calories a day.
Yeah, it's not good. That's not good. That's not good.
Tell me more.
Um uh Yeah. I feel so I've read some different research on the different diets for diabetes. I mean, low calorie means low energy. And if you're not getting enough food for your body to sustain you, you're not going to be functioning well. And also that could impact your blood sugars. So thinking about just in general, 800 calories or 1,000 calories. Like that's barely in the needs of a toddler.
Mhm.
So when you're telling somebody to go on a diet like that, I presume the reason is with diabetes for weight loss. Okay, maybe you'll see an improvement in the A1C at first. Maybe you'll see, some weight loss. But what ends up happening after that is they've weight cycled because they're probably going to, as they start eating normally again, their body's going to try to adapt and they might see that yo-yo dieting pattern, which can increase insulin resistance.
Mhm.
So now the person not only has, regained weight, but now their body is having a harder time with that insulin, getting into the cells. So I think dieting is probably one of the worst things people with diabetes can do, yet it's one of the only things we're told to do.
That's really interesting. I didn't know it would affect your insulin resistance.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll send you after. There's a really, really interesting article about that and some studies on it. So I'll send that to you after.
Yes, please. And probably I can link that in the description of this podcast
Sure.
also.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, wow. So yo-yo dieting does much, much more quote unquote damage, shall I say, with very strong quote unquote science, because I don't want to use fear words, but things like affecting your thyroid health, affecting your blood pressure, cholesterol, yo-yo dieting. Really, yeah.
Yep. So, it is essentially putting stress on your body. I think a lot of times people don't realize that. Like you think about like wellness culture and how people, it's like glamorized to eat less. And the problem is that these things are not sustainable and it's not nourishing our bodies properly. Um, so for somebody with diabetes, not getting enough food, we need consistent eating to happen in order for our blood sugars to stay stable. I mean, even for people without diabetes, because when you think about glucose, blood sugar, that's what gives you the energy. And so if you're not getting that, you're not going to be able to concentrate. You're probably going to have this like preoccupation with food, thinking about it. It kind of messes with like your hunger signals because your body's adapting to not having enough. So I would definitely say, like with any other condition and just with people in general, dieting is not beneficial for people with diabetes. And especially if you're in the mode for trying to like lower your blood sugars.
Yeah. On that topic, jumping from that,
Yeah.
well, I could come from many angles, but I just want to ask, what's the most common diet you find people with diabetes that they jump onto?
Okay. Oh, yes. So definitely like low carb diets and keto. I think keto has been very popular. Um, and it's interesting. I understand. Again, I think a lot of it comes from the fear around having carbs. So you get diagnosed with diabetes, whether it's type 1, type 2, other forms of diabetes. And the thought is carbs are going to affect me negatively. So, how do I find other ways to have things I want without the carb? Um, that's definitely a huge risk for the binge pattern to start for a lot of people. Um, but alongside with that, when people there's another study that was talking about the differences with like a low carb diet, high protein, high fat. And one of the main issues that was happening with that is because people were eating so much protein and fat will still break down into glucose in the body. Fat has a very minimal effect, like maybe like a 10% impact, but protein will break down into glucose after maybe like 5 to 6 hours. So people were not really seeing any improvements and they're like very minimal for a short period of time. And it kind of just went back to increasing. So I say this because I know it's super popular right now. It's very big trend, but I think those diets also remove that permission that you can have with food and still keep that food rule going that, you can't have carbs with diabetes, you can't have sweets. So again, if somebody has that and or is like doing that type of diet and they enjoy it, you know what? That is fine. But I think more times than not, people are having issues and trying to figure out ways to have their cheat days, ways to have the foods that they want without the carbs. They're basically just trying to have the thing they originally wanted. So my thought is, let's learn how to have the thing you want.
A little break before we continue with the podcast. What if I told you that you could end binge eating once and for all and still keep all the binge foods you love, but without losing control over them? Yep, it is possible. You don't need any willpower, no more jumping from diet to diet, and no more meal replacement shakes. You'll also improve your bloating, heartburn, and low energy levels. It's all possible with my self-paced online course called the Binge Freedom Blueprint. It's everything I wish I knew when I struggled with binge eating, all packaged into one platform to help you live the life you truly deserve. The whole goal is to help you put an end to Googling binge eating help once and for all, and to focus fully on the things we really care about in life, such as friends, family, and relationships. So click the link in the description of this podcast now to learn more about the Binge Freedom Blueprint. And with that, let's get back straight to the episode. Yeah, so there's like so much like, fear-mongering with carbs. So when...
Totally.
Yeah, but we still need carbs.
We definitely still need carbs. Like everybody needs carbohydrates. And I know a lot of times people that are very into like the keto diets, things like that, they say you don't need carbohydrates. Like your body will, make them on their own. And it's like, well, your body's going to start breaking down your muscles and your fat in order to get that energy. So we do need it. The body's primary fuel source. So, yeah.
Yeah. And am I correct with if you have type 1 diabetes and you jump onto a keto diet, you can get DKAs? Diabetic?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like a little different. Yes. And then also kind of different, which I'm trying to remember what the difference was. Like, I think, I feel like I might have to get back to him. My mom brain is taking over. So while you won't get like DKA where you're having high blood sugar sent to like the hospital, you will be spilling some ketones, and that's not necessarily beneficial for somebody with diabetes. Yeah. So definitely not a good idea.
Basically, we need carbs.
Yeah, we need carbs.
All right. Well, you just like there's like tons of information, really, really helpful information, Danielle.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Diabetes is such an interesting area. And I think people don't realize just how much people with diabetes struggle with their relationship with food, because from that first point of diagnosis, sometimes people just get a handout and it says cut carbs, or here's the 5 carbs you can eat, or whatever. And it just impacts people so much.
Yeah, even doctors in the hospitals. So I work full-time as a hospital clinical dietitian, and then part-time.
That's amazing.
With Binge Dietitian.
You're amazing.
Yeah, hustling. Yeah, that's why I really, yeah. But like one time I was in the hospital, and the consultant, which is the boss doctor here in the UK, got us the dietitians to see this patient. He was eating all of his meals. He wasn't losing any weight. And then this doctor said, "Can you please give some diabetes education to this patient? He's eating 2 oranges a day." And I was like, really? Like, is this a
Should I give him a high five? Good job.
Not even orange juice. It was like the whole orange with the skin, and the patient knew much, much more about like consistent carbs, what kind of foods. So yeah, there's so much information. Even doctors recommending, like you said, like very low carb diets. Sometimes
Totally.
even recommending like keto diets.
Vegan diets, I've seen that too, plant-based. Again, nothing wrong with that if that's something that you like, but it's not a must for people with diabetes.
Yeah, like, and it as long as it should be sustainable, like rather than just like which diet should I choose today for this patient?
Yeah. Well, which one can you try out? Let's just throw the dart.
Yeah. Carnivore diet.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Speaking of like clinical, I think that's also something that I like to share with people too is like, don't get me wrong, there's some really amazing doctors, endocrinologists, all that. But I noticed that there's so many diet books that doctors write, and I don't quite understand it when it's like in medical school, they've maybe had about 24 hours of nutrition education, and we've had so much experience. Like we are the experts.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that misinformation just kind of keeps cycling. It's like playing a game of telephone until it's like, what's the message now? Like, what do I do? It's just so confusing for patients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if it's similar there in California, but here in the UK, like the doctors, if they if they give some dietary advice and this patient ends up in the hospital, they're not like bound by any like regulatory the GMC, which is the medical board. They don't like dietary advice, but dietitians like me here in the UK, if I like recommend something that's against the evidence, then I can like have my license questioned. So, which is why you could trust a dietitian, but like doctors, they're giving any advice, and then if anything goes wrong, it's not on them.
It's crazy. Yeah.
I don't know why it's like there in California or in.
I want to say it's kind of similar, sadly. I mean, I still work on call at a hospital. And I mean, it's still happening for sure. You know, I think dietitians in the facility I'm at work towards credibility where the doctors will take a step back. But, you know, there's some that are very gung ho and want to just tell you the diet they're on and you should be on it too. And it's like, doesn't work like that. Does not work like that. So, yeah, it's a little similar. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Well, it's our mission to debunk all of these anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think I love your content and I love all that you do. And I can't believe you're working full time and doing, you know, seeing clients outside. That's incredible.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I just really enjoy it.
Yeah, I can tell. It's awesome. It seems like your passion point. So keep doing it.
Yeah. Anyway, Danielle, like if people are struggling with the relationship with food and they want some diabetes advice, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm mostly on Instagram. My handle is Food Freedom Diabetes. Same for my website, foodfreedomdiabetes.com. Let's keep it simple. Same with my email, foodfreedomdiabetes@gmail.com. So yeah, those are like probably the main few ways you can contact me or follow me. So yeah.
Yeah. And okay, I'll link that in the description of this podcast. And this little tradition that I do here in the podcast is where the previous guest would ask a question for the current guest, which is you, Danielle.
Okay. Oh.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Yeah. So the question the previous guest wanted to ask you is, what's the best and the worst advice you have been given?
For diabetes in specific or just in life?
Anything really.
Man. Oh my gosh. I got to really reel back there. Oh, okay. Back to pregnancy. I had a doctor. So towards the end of my pregnancy, I was having some really fun swelling in my ankles.
Oh,
Something some people can look forward to. Yeah, it's super great. And I remember asking the doctor, I said, listen, you know, I'm working on, you know, reducing some sodium with my cooking, elevating my legs, things like that. Is there anything else I can do? And she told me to cut carbs. And I asked her why. I said, well, I'm a dietitian, so I'm curious why you think that would help me. And she said, because carbs make you swell. And I said, really? So how many carbs should I be eating a day? And she didn't know. And so I said, and I didn't listen. So that was recently probably the worst advice I was given.
Did she say it with lots of confidence? Carbs make you
It
swell.
really did.
Really?
Yeah, carbs make you swell. And I was like,
Uh,
immediately no. Immediately no. That's not it. That's not it. And I guess there's no hope if I elevate my legs and the swelling's not going down. So yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that's my bad advice.
I mean, never mind if you might have underlying heart failure, kidney issues leading to swelling. It's all the carbs apparently.
It's bread. But in my mind, I was like, then why has this not happened to other people before? Like, wouldn't there be like a whole name for this?
Yeah.
Like breadema? Breadema? I don't know. Something like that. So yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised
that's mine.
if that popped up by
I know.
What was the best?
Yeah, that's a good one. What's the best advice? The best advice that I was given, I feel like I've had a lot of good advice. I think maybe from like my therapist. She would tell me, just to remember that when you're feeling anxious and maybe that you're not doing enough in life, that, where you're at right now, the current thing you're focusing on is more than enough. And to give yourself some leeway to be okay with what's happening. Because I think I personally, and maybe other people can relate, I put a lot of pressure on myself to get tons of things done throughout the day and take care of my diabetes and take care of a newborn. It's like, it's overwhelming. And just like what you're doing right now, what's right in front of you is more than enough. So if anyone else needs that advice, that really helped me a lot.
That's really, really good advice.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, thanks to my therapist. So,
and the question what would be the question you'd like to ask for the next guest?
I feel like I'm going to make it food related. If you could only have one dessert for the rest of your life, what dessert would that be?
Ooh. Well, what would your dessert be?
I think it would be gelato.
Gelato. Oh, that's a classic.
Yeah, there's a gelato place near my house, and they have a cookie butter flavor that's so good.
Cookie butter? Is it like cookie dough flavor?
Not cookie dough. It's like Biscoff. You ever had Biscoff?
Yeah, no, Biscoff, yeah. Oh, that's really good.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. So I think gelato would be it for me for sure.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, I think mine was a bit specific. So those brownies that you can heat in a microwave and then you put vanilla ice cream on top.
Like a lava cake?
Yeah. Essentially anything that's hot and then like something nice and cold with it. That would be really
so good. Yeah. Oh, even like cookie pies, little cookie pies with ice cream. Oh yeah. That would be up there for me too. So good.
Never any guilt.
No, amazing. That sounds good. I like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Well, Danielle, I'll link your links in the description of this podcast. And
okay, awesome.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming along to this podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on and get to chat with you more.
Yeah. Well, thank you for everything. What if I told you you can end binge eating and still keep all the foods you love without dieting, without willpower, and no more meal plans? Check the link in the description for my exclusive self-paced Binge Freedom Blueprint online course to learn everything I wish I knew when I struggle with binge eating. It's all packaged into one platform to make it easy to transform your life right now.